This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 438, CKEditor 4, End of Life. On today's show, we are talking about CKEditor 4, End of Life, moving to CKEditor 5, and what you can expect from CKEditor 5 now and in the future with guest Wim Leers. We'll also cover CKEditor 5 premium features as our module of the week. He stumbled upon Drupal during the Drupal 5 beta days and was impressed with Drupal's code quality compared with WordPress and Joomla. He built a site for an open source project using Drupal so others could continue it while he studied, and he got hooked to Drupal. Welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Nick Lapham, founder at Enlightened Development, and today my co-hosts are Ivan Stegic, CEO of 10.7.
Hello.
And also joining us, as usual, John Picozzi, Solution Architect at EPAM.
Hello, Internet friends.
And now to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson-Klutz, a Senior Solutions Engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Nick. Have you ever wanted to offer your content creators advanced capabilities like real-time collaboration? There's a module for that. It's called CKEditor 5 Premium Features, and it was created in September 2022 by Victor Volk, although recent releases are by Wojciech Kukowski, both of CK Source, the company behind CKEditor. Just a note that Victor was on this show on episode 372 for any listeners who want to go back and listen to that conversation. Now, the current version available is 1.2.5, which works with Drupal 9 and 10. It is actively maintained. In fact, that latest release was just in the past month. There is a user guide available, and the link is in the README file. And it has 16 issues open, 8 of which are bugs, against an official install count of 159 Drupal sites. Now, to me, the most compelling features enabled by this module are the ones that turn your Drupal WYSIWYG into a robust collaboration tool, similar to what users may be used to in tools like Google Docs or Office 365. Has a real-time inline comments and changes from multiple users. You can do things like track changes to suggest ways the content could be improved. It can show a history of changes made in the WYSIWYG independent of the saved Drupal revisions, and you can do things like tag users with @mentions to have them notified. There's also a productivity pack available to enhance your WYSIWYG. And again, some of these will be familiar to users that also use popular online collaboration tools. So you can have a document outline that uses headings within your content to create navigation for moving quickly within the overall content. It can generate a linked table of contents, which will automatically update as headings are added or changed. You can use / commands to execute actions. Has enhanced paste from Office to preserve complex incoming content structures, but with clean HTML as the result, and a variety of other capabilities. Another premium feature is the ability to export to Word or PDF, and it also has a feature to restore full screen editing, which is something that CKEditor 4 had as part of the open source offering, but was dropped as part of the move to CKEditor 5. Finally, this module also includes an AI assistant that provides yet another interesting way to empower your content authors to leverage AI tools for their writing, including the ability to change the style, length, or tone of selected content using pre-made prompts or generate content with custom queries. It also works with a number of different models out of the box, so you're not restricted to ChatGPT. The module is open source, but using these premium free features does require a subscription from CK Source. The pricing will depend on the number of active users and which features you need. So if you'd like more information, you can use the contact form at ckeditor.com. It's also worth mentioning here that the team at Palantir has released a YouTube video of an open source collaborative editor that they're working on. They're calling Edit Together, which is based on the ProseMirror rich text editor framework. The blog where they announced that was released in July of last year, July 2023, and it mentions a mid-2024 release. So it'll be interesting to see as that gets closer how that starts to take shape. So let's talk about CKEditor 5 premium features.
Yeah, so I have a little bit of context maybe to share on the full screen bit that indeed didn't make it into CKEditor 5, into the core plugin that we are shipping with Drupal core. The reason that we don't have that is because it's not part of CKEditor 5 core, if you will. And they actually have a very good reason for that. CKEditor 4 was kind of like a more classical editor, in the sense that there is an iframe-esque thing with a UI around it. And they added the ability to do inline editing, in-place editing at a later time within a floating toolbar that some of you may remember. But CKEditor 5 is very different. CKEditor 5 is rewritten from the ground up, and it's intended to be kind of like a framework to build editing experiences with, kind of like Drupal in that sense. And so it doesn't have like a strong opinion on what that user interface looks like. And it is for that reason that they don't offer a full screen plugin out of the box, because like there's so many ways that you can build a UI on top of CKEditor that it didn't make sense to them to offer that out of the box or as an official plugin, so to say. And so that's why they wrote the necessary plugin for premium features so that it's available. It's actually, I think if I remember correctly, the only feature that is free if you install premium features. And so you can install it and just use that. And that works well for the UI that Drupal chose to adopt, which is kind of more the classical UI, because that fits well with the text area for typical body or long text fields that Drupal offers. So yeah, full screen, there is a little bit of history there. It's unfortunate that it's not out of the box and that it's not part of core, but it kind of makes sense. It isn't something that is going to be usable by every CKEditor 5 user.
And it's probably worth mentioning too that if the full screen is really the sole feature that you're really interested in here, there is a separate module called CKEditor 5 full screen that does only that. But yeah, there are options.
Sorry. So full screen, like full screen editing, are we talking like borderless editing? Like, is that essentially what we mean? Because I mean, I don't usually use that in Google Docs. I'm just wondering, like full screen, how does that present itself?
So at least my experience is it makes the WYSIWYG sort of take up the entire window so that it becomes more of like a a Word or Google Docs style experience.
Got it.
Yeah, you stop seeing the Drupal admin toolbar. You stop seeing any Drupal Chrome, UI Chrome, but you only see CKEditor. That's it.
Got it. So you get more editable area, basically. Interesting.
Yeah, massive.
So I mean, I think everybody would like more Google Docs like experiences when they're editing content, right? But it's and I didn't hear us mention this, but so this module obviously on Drupal.org, but requires a subscription of sorts, or is it a one-time licensing fee in order to be able to use those fun collaborative features?
It does require a subscription for it. Sounds like everything except the full screen.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, if any of our listeners are using this, I'd be curious to know kind of about how much that is, because there's no information directly on the site. I might reach out on the forum and find out where that is, but I'd be curious how much that will cost, because I could definitely see that being really useful, especially in some intranets, like the ability to kind of just collaborate on content or make it. One of the things I'm curious about is, does it handle kind of that autosave feature as well that we had talked about a few weeks ago? Like, does somebody still have to hit the save button in the Drupal form to like permanently save the content, or because it's kind of real time, does it automatically get saved? Because that would be, how does that interact with other fields too? I'm curious how that works. That'd be interesting to know.
I'd be curious to know how versions work too, and revisions, not just autosave. Like,
right.
So, you know, Google Docs, there's like automatically creating versions for you, and you can always go back and restore something. Like, I'd be curious to see how that works too.
Yep. I know that, or one of the reasons that it is a subscription is that it does require a server component that is not in JavaScript, not in a browser, not in Drupal. It's a separate thing that they're hosting to do the real-time syncing thing and resolving conflicts. I don't know the details of that necessarily, but so that kind of makes sense as an ongoing thing they have to keep running. So subscription kind of makes sense from that point of view. I I would imagine that there is some kind of autosave. Like there has to be some version stored in the server-side components that they operate. But it doesn't definitely not integrate with the Drupal revision functionality. It's independent of that. And it definitely also does not deal with other fields. It's only purely the CKEditor instance that's running that is made synced, nothing else. Actually, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so that's interesting. So that means that essentially you're not running that server component locally. So that means your content is like being beamed off to like some CKEditor server somewhere, right? So like there could be, depending on your use case or who you're implementing this for, right? There could be security implications there potentially,
100%,
maybe.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I believe that they offer presumably at a higher price, the ability to run it on premises or locally. Like you can get your own instance, but there are ways around it. If I remember correctly, I see Martin nodding, and I think he just researched this, so I think that's correct then. But yeah,
interesting.
there is a way around it, but it's gonna cost more probably.
I suspect that they also do store the stuff locally. Otherwise, like you'd be making a request every time somebody tried to load that page to view it. Never mind.
Right.
And like, how does publishing work? Exactly.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be saved in Drupal, right? Otherwise, like, what's the point of using Drupal almost? Like, it's just like magically syncing this field if you're looking at the same thing at the same time.
So I think the way that collaboration works is as people are editing, it's doing that sort of sync off to the, remote server instance and keeping its own sort of like version history and, tracking changes and all those good things. But in terms of what's displayed, it's always directly from Drupal. So it's really only like once you hit save that it would actually update what would be displayed to the users.
Like I see very specific use cases for this, right? So like I see like, hey, if you're on an intranet, right, and you want collaboration tools at your fingertips, but like in my like business administration brain, I'm like, guys, just use the Google Docs that we already pay for that's part of the G Suite and copy and paste that stuff into the website. Like we don't necessarily need this on our website.
Well, there's things that Google Docs doesn't do and can't do.
Okay.
Google Docs. So this is very, like, I know a little bit about this because of the history of WYSIWYG editors in Drupal. Maybe you remember back in 2012, we were going to add Aloha editor to Drupal core, not CKEditor. That was changed at the last moment. And Aloha editor had one thing going really strongly for it. It was architected from the ground up with, I think, new algorithms that Google didn't have because Google Docs would not be able to resolve certain conflicts at the time. And CK Source has done similar work to make this possible because Google Docs, unlike other things, makes the entire document linear, whereas HTML is a tree, essentially. And you can modify things in the entire tree at any point in time. You can shift things around. And like Google Docs just cannot deal with some of these kinds of things. Google Docs, of course, also is limited to basic formatting, I would say. Like there's tables, but there's not arbitrary HTML markup and arbitrarily complex plugins. Whereas in CKEditor 5, you can create from the ground up very complex, very rich things that you can embed. You can go as crazy as you like with embedded things that are loading objects and data from elsewhere that are live displayed in the edit. Like you can do crazy things if you like, or maybe not crazy necessarily, but like solving your use case, if it's appropriate. And then those more feature-rich components would actually sync live in real time with collaborative editing as well. So depending on your use case, Google Docs can be like cheap, yes. It would require a Google account, which some of us is a reason not to use it. But it's also limited. It's very good. I think we all use it probably very frequently.
Interesting.
But it's got different trade-offs essentially.
So like that's super interesting, Wim, because like now I'm thinking, okay, well, if I'm editing website content, like I'm not going to want to use Google Docs because of the things you just mentioned, right? But if I'm writing a blog post and it's like more document linear sort of like, flow, then maybe I would. So
Yep.
that's super interesting. I think like those use cases, like again, like as Martin likes to tell me, it depends, right? Like you're going to pick the use case that works best for you. And this is I think this is a pretty powerful addition.
Some people choose to do layout related things in a rich text editor in the body field. The body field becomes the majority of the page almost.
Mm-hmm.
And like if you start doing layout things, and imagine that works with real-time collaborative editing, that's something Google Docs definitely doesn't do.
Right.
So powerful things are possible, but you have to put in the work to actually take advantage of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Martin. As always, you had a wonderful module of the week that ties into the show. So if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can reach me on all the Drupal and social channels as Manclue, but also happy to receive Module of the Week nominations in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack.
Awesome. Now on to our primary topic.
Actually, before we shift topics, I have a small addition to make for the CKEditor 5 Premium features. Sorry, I didn't know what the right time would be. I didn't realize you were going to jump to the next thing yet. I reached out to the CKEditor 5 people and I asked, what do you have planned for CKEditor 5 Premium features? And apparently they do have a number of things that are going to be added in the next quarter. Something related to the case change plugin, which I think they announced publicly, but also something related to spelling and grammar checking. I don't know if that's going to be part of the premium offering, meaning paid. I think so. But then they are going to add a completely free to use counterpart called CKEditor 5 Plugin Pack. And that's going to add 5 to 10 plugins, and they plan to release that next quarter as well. So somewhere between April and June of 2024. Don't know the details. They're not sharing that yet, but they're planning to offer more additional functionality for free for the Drupal community to use.
I'll tell you,
Awesome.
spelling and punctuation and grammar I would pay for that, because if anybody's ever read anything I've written, they know I need help.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So CKEditor 4 was end of life in June 2023. Can you give us a brief overview of some of the types of issues that people might have if they're still using CKEditor 4 in Drupal?
If it's working for you today, you're not necessarily going to have any problems because browsers are very good nowadays at not breaking backwards compatibility. The functionality of CKEditor 4 is very stable. There are bugs, and some of them have been around for a long time, but that's true of any project, really. The more likely thing that you will encounter is that your site is technically insecure, which, depending on the type of site it is and like how exposed it is to the web, meaning do you accept input from anonymous users in the form of comments, and do you ever edit those? Or is it only trusted people that are using the rich text editor? Those are the trade-offs that are specific to any particular site. But just last week, actually, there was a first release of the CKEditor for LTS module, because as of December 31st, or January 1st, 2024, rather, CKEditor 4 is no longer security supported in Drupal core, nor is the contrib module. So CKEditor 4 was given 1 year of extra security coverage for the Drupal community because the Drupal community has adopted it so widely. But it is an extra cost because CKEditor 4 is more than 10 years old at this point. Yeah. It was built in a different time and age when browsers were still wildly inconsistent. It's a very different era now with much faster JavaScript execution engines and so on. So CKEditor 5 is very different. And so they had to, at some point, decide, we're going to stop supporting it. We got an extra year of security coverage, but now that has ended. And so in principle, every site now is insecure as of last week, except for those that are using CKEditor 4 LTS, which is a contrib module that is also something that requires payment, unfortunately, because somebody has to do the security coverage, and CK Source offers that, but it requires payment.
So you actually said something interesting there that the Drupal community relies on CKEditor for pretty widely. I'm wondering if you can provide a little background on why a third-party library, third-party editor like CKEditor was chosen, and why not, why not go roll our own? Was this an effort to get off the Drupal island, or did we see some other values in going to something like CKEditor?
That's a really interesting question. This goes back to, like, I joined Acquia in 2012, and the first thing I had to do was work on this stuff. And so it's a question that dates back to that time. But I still recall many of the aspects, and I think it can boil down to this. I think anybody would have loved it if Drupal had its own rich text editor that didn't depend on external parties and so on. But it's probably wildly unrealistic for us to build our own. It's like a massive, massive effort to have it working consistently across all browsers, to have it do well in terms of accessibility, because Drupal does well in terms of accessibility, but it's still very different. We rely strongly on the accessibility aspects, ARIA landmarks, and so on in HTML. But a interactive application that is not HTML based as much, and is much more relying on you do something in JavaScript, changes the DOM, and you need to keep the user informed all the way along. Like, that is a daunting undertaking. So yeah, in principle, we could have done it ourselves, but it already was a struggle to get the integration with Drupal in a really good place, let alone build our own editor. So yeah, I don't know. Ideally, maybe that would have happened. It would have been a lot of duplication of effort too, of course.
Yeah.
But it just was not realistic.
I mean, overall, it makes sense, right? Like a WYSIWYG editor is like a big complex thing, as you just said, right? And like being able to offload that onto another team that's like going to hyper focus on that and build out the best WYSIWYG editor they can, to me, makes a lot more sense than I really despise like when there's a good solution out there and like people roll their own, because it just seems like, we could all put our effort into like one thing and make one thing better, as opposed to like, oh, I'm going to do my own thing and it'll be okay.
Yeah, I almost feel like this is a very similar discussion to what we talked about in Core a decade ago, which was maybe we should start moving towards frameworks that are more widely accepted, that have end of lives that other organizations are also depending on. And so when we move to Symfony, like, awesome, we can have these releases, and we know when Symfony is going to move to the next version. Like, wouldn't it be great if there was a framework for WYSIWYG? Like, it feels like CKEditor is maybe one of those things that we take for granted, right? That could be a framework. It would be awesome if we had an open source one that we could all rely on and that had releases. But that's just simply not the case right now. So I'm kind of wondering, like, what were the alternatives? I know we used, was it TinyMCE for a while in Drupal? I can't remember. It's been a long time. But I also know there's CKEdit, right, Nick?
I like that.
But I don't know that one.
You don't know that one?
I feel like, nobody does, but okay.
Well, it's
yeah. Okay, I have seen it, but like, you pronounce it that way, like, well done.
Yeah. I thought that was funny too. I do want to say though, I agree with what you're saying, Ivan. I think CKEditor 5 is a framework though. So I just wanted to mention that. But I like to ask these,
okay.
Yeah, it is. And it's a plugin architecture now, which is why there's some, I mean, CKEditor 4 had plugins too, but CKEditor 5 is plugin first, I think, which is something that we learned on the show with Victor and I think it was Peter, and something that you alluded to, Wim, as well. But I like to ask those type of questions, because sometimes even as a developer, sometimes you look at something and you go like, oh, this should be easy, right? And I know, as somebody who's dealt with DOM manipulation or HTML parsing, that kind of stuff, it's very complex. So I'd like to hear, and it's something, as you said, you've worked on for 12 years. So I'd like to hear your opinion on that. But just to kind of iterate on Ivan's question, Do you think we're with CKEditor for the long haul, or do you think there's room to evaluate other things like Nice Edit or IMCE again, or is CKEditor that good?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I want to start by saying that the rich text editor integration into Drupal core basically originates from the WYSIWYG module of the Drupal 7 and 6 era. And the WYSIWYG editor module, the WYSIWYG module was essentially a kind of very abstract module that didn't provide a WYSIWYG integration at all. It just provided the common ground so that we in Drupal could write a single plugin that would work in TinyMC, in CKEditor 3 at the time, I think,
I forgot about that.
in other things and so on. But like it kind of was like the dream of like writing a universal app and have it work everywhere. Like today, that would be write an app once and it works wonderfully, delightfully, integrating and respecting the platform guidelines of Android versus iOS versus iPadOS versus Windows. Like, good luck doing that. And so that was an ambitious undertaking, but not really realistic on the plugin part. But there's many parts that still exist today in Drupal core of the WYSIWYG module in Drupal contrib. And the fact that that exists to this day also means that, yes, you can totally implement an alternative to CKEditor in Drupal core, meaning you can install a contrib module, implement what is called an editor plugin. And so you can integrate any text editor, whether that's NickEdit or NiceEdit, whichever way is the right pronunciation, or TinyMCE or Gutenberg or whatever you like. So yeah, the infrastructure exists. We're not tightly coupled to CKEditor. That was one of the concerns back in 2012. So that is definitely not an issue. What is an issue is getting an ecosystem going around it. It's a lot of work to get it going and then have people write modules that provide plugins for the editor that you're implementing. So for example, if I were to create I think there's maybe a prose mirror module as well for Drupal. And so that would integrate prose mirror, but then it's just the base prose mirror, if you will, without like the deeper integration. And people can do that, and that's intentionally left open. But we saw during Drupal 8 cycle, meaning that's the time that Drupal 8.0 was the first release to ship with CKEditor 4. And we saw that almost nothing was happening on that front. Like if it was ever going to happen, it was likely during that time when Drupal core chose CKEditor 4, but others in the community were free to disagree and install and develop this alternative. And that didn't really happen. CKEditor 4 was chosen just because it was the most reliable looking, the most complete looking solution. It supported in-place editing, which was a requirement at the time. It had very strong accessibility compared to other text editors. It had a lot of things going for it. And you can look back at the historical issues to have an overwhelmingly exhaustive list of arguments why this one was chosen compared to others. We first actually went with Aloha Editor, which was like up and coming, promising, new, refreshing take on things. But they were also expecting the Drupal community to help finish it, to help stabilize it. And that was kind of a thing that was turning out to be very difficult. There were lots of loose ends still at the time for Aloha Editor. And so the community didn't have the ability, the Drupal community didn't have the manpower, if you will, to help get that to stable and be more influenced by Drupal, let alone build their own editor, like John was suggesting. So a lot of factors come into play, but there's no way that we're completely tied to CKEditor. People can, to this day, switch.
Was Gutenberg ever on that list and evaluated?
It didn't exist in 2012.
Oh.
Yeah.
So I have a question, and I'm not going to put this on Wim because this is unfair, unfair question. But I'm just curious. Maybe Nick or Yvonne can help me with this. But like, what's like a use case for like wanting to use a different editor? Like personal preference, I guess, could be one. But like,
I mean, your organization uses the other editor in other platforms, and you want consistency between platforms.
I mean, I guess so. I just like in my like everything's got to fit in a box brain. I'm like, why am I going to like switch out the editor that that Drupal uses, because like CKEditor is, it's in core, it ships with Drupal. There's a lot of support around it in the Drupal community. Like, why am I going to go to Nick or Nice Editor? But I guess that's a good point. If you have other platforms, systems that use another editor, and you want to bring that in for cohesiveness, then I guess that makes sense.
I also think like there's something to sorry, Wim. I think there's something to the whole thing of what people are used to, and large organizations being really hard to move to something that's new. So like you're probably going to be de-incentivized to go from CKEditor to Nick Edit, right? Like it's going to be so many changes, even though we're still just doing bold and H1 and H2 and so on. I know with a recent client, they were forced to upgrade from CKEditor 4 to 5 because of the security concerns, because of all of the reasons that we've talked about, and the users just were not having it. Like, we want the old thing, like, this is not working out. But then there was this re-education part, and we did that, and like we got to the other side. But there's a reason, like, it's an upgrade, it's not even a change. So I think there's like a de-incentive sometimes to switch, even if you can.
Yep, and related to that, I think bigger organizations are more likely to have multiple web platforms, like whether that's CMS or like different systems, like I don't know, an inventory system, for example, and maybe they
donation
have like
system, volunteer system,
sure.
yeah,
anything you want to pick. But the thing is, like, if it's a big enough organization, maybe they've customized the editor specifically to their needs, and then it really makes sense for them to have a consistent experience, and they want to have this critical thing critical to them, and then this ability in Drupal to switch to a different editor makes it possible to do that kind of thing. I think it's a very exceptional thing. It's like probably single-digit percentage of Drupal sites, but if you need it, then at least it's possible.
I think.
I mean, it is a pro, right? Yeah. Because it shows the flexibility of Drupal, definitely.
I think one of the big things too is this shows. I think it shows that you and the team that were evaluating this made the right decision with CKEditor as well, because before CKEditor was part of Drupal core, you had to use Contrib for WYSIWYG, and I would say a lot of my clients were with CKEditor, but a few of them like insisted on IMCE, even though I personally did not like that. But once CKEditor was part of core, I've never installed the IMCE because it was just there. And even like upgrading older Drupal sites to newer Drupal sites, like just saying like, hey, this is what's included. Like nobody wants to pay the extra effort to, I mean, even though it's not, as far as like installing like a contributed module, like and configuring it isn't all that much more effort than using the one that's already there, because the contrib modules are pretty well integrated.
Yeah, but it's a support base too. There's a wider support base for the the incumbent.
Yeah, another to that point, I looked up Aloha Editor because I had not heard of it. Aloha Editor is still actively maintained, but they have 9,000 commits compared to CKEditor 5's 55,000 commits. So when you look at the install base and the responsiveness, particularly to the Drupal community, I think it makes sense you went the way that you went.
Yeah. I just want to take a step back here and just celebrate the fact that we made the right decision. Like Nick kind of said it and we went over it, but like, yeah, like well done us, well done the team that did that. That was definitely the right decision for us. So.
And I'm glad you say that, and I want to specifically call out somebody because I, together with others, led us onto the track of Aloha Editor. And I had to make a choice, like CKEditor 4 in my defense, sort of. CKEditor 4 in the time was, when we were working on this, was still in kind of like, what is it called? Like the sneak preview phase. Like they were very secretive at the time. Yeah. They didn't want to share how it was going to be architected, what features were going to be. Stealth mode. Yes. Yeah. They were in stealth mode at the time. And so we removed them from the list of potential choices because it didn't seem like a choice. There was no information to be had. So we picked Aloha Editor. We spent, I don't remember exactly, but many months. I flew to Vienna to work with the team. Somebody else in Aqueous, like actually they weren't in the same team, but they were a JavaScript expert, Theodore Biadala, Nod on Drupal.org. He is a JavaScript expert. I wasn't at the time, and like we flew there, we worked with them, we were enthusiastic about what was coming. But then as time went on, we noticed that it's going to be a lot of extra effort and a lot of time that we don't have before Drupal 8 has to ship to get this to the stable place and the accessible place we need it to be. And so Nate Hogg, Quick Sketch, he actually joined and like was surprised and I think maybe a little bit shocked that we were going down this route. And like he really made the case for we should go with CKEditor 4, which is also new, which actually does the things we need. And so it's honestly Quick Sketch that is to thank for the big turnaround and us making the right choice.
Oh, wow.
So thanks again, Quick Sketch.
That's awesome.
Okay.
Well,
So we've talked about kind of the history of CKEditor. We've talked about how we got to like today, this moment right here, right? So with Drupal 10 moved to CKEditor 5, and then CKEditor 4 moved to Contrib, right? So I'm wondering how you suggest folks that may be on Drupal 9 looking to go to Drupal 10, or folks that are on Drupal 10 still using CKEditor 4, upgrade, right? So that way they're on CKEditor 5, they're on the latest and greatest, and you know, they can move forward.
Yep. So Drupal 9 has to be feature compatible with Drupal 10. Like before Drupal 10 can release, like Drupal 10 exists in the last release of Drupal 9. So everything you can do with Drupal 10.0, you can do with Drupal 9.5 as well. And so the simplest possible choice to make is make sure you're first on Drupal 9.5. And then in Drupal 9.5, install a CKEditor 5 module. Like it's part of Drupal core. It's available right for you then and there. And go to your list of text formats and text editors and switch from CKEditor 4 to 5. Just like in the selections, like in the screen where you can edit the text format and text editor, there's a drop down. Currently, it's going to say CKEditor 4, changes to CKEditor 5, and you're going to get a message at the top that explains like what has changed, like which buttons have become which buttons, which tags have been changed to which other tags, which attributes are now supported on top of the things that you had before versus which ones do not have support, and so on. So it's going to be a very detailed overview that's going to tell you whether something is missing or not. If something is missing, you need to look at the set of contrib modules. And there is a page on Drupal.org that is called the Upgrade Coordination for Modules Providing CKEditor 4 Plugins. It's got a massive table, or actually 3 tables, one that is the list of done, one that is a list of basically nearly ready and being evaluated, and then there's a list of the long tail, effectively, the modules that are lesser used, pointing to the relevant issue, but oftentimes there is some patch or some merge request, but it's not done yet. So look at that page, and I really hope for your sake that you didn't choose CKEditor 4 modules that were rather obscure. If they're rather obscure, then you're probably gonna need to help get the CKEditor 5 equivalent going.
Like the anchor, plugin.
I think there is. I think the anchor one actually has a release now.
Okay.
There is progress there. But yes, there is a few that are less obscure. I think that's what you're getting at, John. That do not yet have a CKEditor 5 equivalent. But largely speaking, if you look at the big picture, it's going to be true that the vast majority of the widely adopted CKEditor 4 plugins have CKEditor 5 equivalents. The more obscure you go, the higher the probability that you're going to need to help port it. But most of the things, like the modules that have 50, 100,000 sites using them on Drupal 8, they all have CKEditor 5 equivalents. So all of those major ones do. Okay. Now, there is one extra gotcha, and that is that CKEditor 5 is following a different versioning scheme than semantic versioning than that we're used to. Or rather, they're actually following Semver, but they're rather aggressive about it because they do not want to be frozen in timeout in terms of APIs. So multiple times a year, they do a new major release. But of course, that means that in Drupal, we would have broken contrib modules that integrate with CKEditor 5 as a result. So what we do in Drupal is we only upgrade in every core minor release. So Drupal 9.5 from 9.4, 10.0 from 9.5, 10.1 from 10.0, and so on. Every minor release is able to do a major version bump of CKEditor 5. And most of the time, there's barely any disruption, but sometimes there is. So sometimes that causes some contrib modules to break, and that's why it's a little bit tricky. And that's the reason I'm bringing this up. Drupal 9.5 is now actually on an old version of CKEditor 5. Drupal 10.2 is a much more feature-complete version of CKEditor 5 than the one that shipped with Drupal 9.5. So that makes it a little bit tricky. So if you notice that some of the problems that you're encountering in upgrading from CKEditor 4 to CKEditor 5 while still on Drupal 9.5, then the recommendation changes a little bit. It would be to install the CKEditor 4 contrib module that is available for Drupal 10, so that you can switch to Drupal 10 without dealing with CKEditor at all, and then update all the way to Drupal 10.2 while using the CKEditor 4 module, and then make the switch from CKEditor 4 to 5, because then you're switching from whichever the latest CKEditor 4 version is to the latest and greatest version of CKEditor 5 that ships with Drupal core. And yeah, it's a little bit tricky, but there were some changes, for example, that were really complicated to solve for them upstream in CKEditor 5 itself. And so that took a lot of time. So that didn't make it in time for Drupal 9.5, but it has landed in Drupal 10.0 or 10.1 or 10.2. And it's only in Drupal 10.2 that all of the truly critical data loss issues are completely fixed. So there were some use cases that were pretty prominent in the Drupal community that were almost unseen in the rest of the CKEditor user base. And that's, for example, the use of divs. Like, we like to use divs despite our kind of resistance to it and our desire for clean markup. Divs are very prominently used, very commonly, for example, for like a div with a class that is then represented in some different way through CSS. Like, that's something you just don't see outside of Drupal almost. And so supporting certain, and also a tricky thing about divs is you don't see them. So that's a challenge for a text editor to visualize that. There is no visual representation of a div by default. So switch to Drupal 10.2 as soon as you can and make the switch then. That's probably the easiest solution. Drupal 10.2 first, then 4 to 5.
Besides the change in how aggressive they are in the Semver versioning scheme and the things you just discussed, and then the long tail of plugins that maybe aren't supported, what are some other upgrade gotchas, maybe changes in the UI or other things that we should be aware of?
That's also a good question. So CKEditor 4 versus 5, one of the most prominent changes in terms of the integration with Drupal is that in CKEditor 4 used a Drupal dialog for interacting with or creating or editing links or images or media. So that means that the dialog you get to see as soon as you click the image button or the link button in CKEditor 4 is actually, it is JavaScript talking to the Drupal server, asking Drupal to render something, Drupal sending an AJAX response, and that showing a dialog. That means that there is latency, because by definition, before you can even start creating a link, you have to wait for your browser to go to Drupal and come back. So that's not great, but it actually has one strong benefit, and that is anybody can hook form alter that dialog, and so you can inject additional things. In CKEditor 5, we chose to go with the recommended and better authoring experience solution, which is to not go to the Drupal server and do it entirely client-side, which means zero latency. Everything is snappy and fast all the time. The downside is that for certain alterations, now it's no longer what is very familiar and not scary for a Drupal developer to write a simple hook form alter. That now has to become a CKEditor 5 plugin that alters the existing plugin to inject some additional components or change it around. And so that is, I think, the biggest gotcha in terms of changing things.
I love those little details because, I mean, I've used CKEditor for over a decade now, and I had no idea that it was using a Drupal form to render there. But yeah, that's a pretty big change. For me, I think the biggest change in the UI that my clients noticed is the drop down for setting styles. In CKEditor 4, that drop down would only show, if you selected an element, it would only show options available for that element, essentially, except for certain block level ones, and it could change it. So if you highlighted an anchor and you had an A with a class in it, and the backend would only show those. And if you selected something else, it would change it from an anchor to a div or something. I remember the exact details. Whereas on the new system, on CKEditor 5, when you hit that styles drop down, you see everything. And the ones that you can't select are grayed out. And the ones that you can select are obviously available to select. But I think that through most of my clients, it's become something that I'm like, this is going to change. It still technically works almost the same, except for some switching. Like you can't switch from a span to a div. I think that's been fixed in the latest version. But when we were updating, that was a major point of contention for a lot of my clients.
Yep, I get that. Yeah, there's if I remember correctly, the reasoning for them was to do it the current way, where listing all the things, all the styles always, is because that allows the content creator to build some kind of muscle memory, because you know exactly where to find it. Like it's always in the same place. But it doesn't scale as well. I think that's the thing that you're noticing, and many, like, you're not the first person to tell me this for sure. Like it's overwhelming. It can easily be overwhelming because Drupal sites like to have a lot of styles, meaning just the ability to add a class to something. And I think there is a difference in assumptions, and it kind of depends on your use case. For some people, the new approach would be better, but for others, it would be worse for sure.
It's a catch-22. Like for every single client that's like annoyed that they can see everything and they can't select them, I have clients that were annoyed that they couldn't see the other options, even if they weren't available. So I think it's a wash. Like it. I have equal clients in each camp. So
would it be great if it were configurable?
I was gonna say, if it were an option you could choose, that would solve all my problems as a developer.
Like honestly, like they're very open to this kind of feedback. So if you articulate very concrete suggestions, especially the ones that do not involve breaking backwards compatibility, meaning this is an opt-in thing to allow you to change and choose which mode or whatever you call it, I'm sure they would be receptive to that.
Maybe I'll open an issue and GitHub for that. What else is new with CKEditor 5? Because I remember being fairly impressed in our discussion with them back in episode, I think 372, that the complete re-architecture means it's even more plugin driven than CKEditor 4 was, and that lends a lot of flexibility. And one of the things they talked about is in the premium module, like the real-time editing. But what kinds of features are getting you excited about switching to CKEditor 5 over the last couple of years?
You're asking me or the group? Okay. To me, it's actually the fact that it's much more streamlined. Just like I'm not necessarily using the most advanced things and very intricate plugins, content modules that add additional plugins. For me, it's like the speed of writing and interacting in Google Docs, for example, is really good. And in CKEditor 4, it's less good, especially because of the jarring, like click something, wait for the Drupal dialog, then hit a submit button. Like everything is very, like you have to shift your focus around a lot more. Whereas in CKEditor 5, it's much smoother because it's less like taking you into a different context. You stay in the same writing context. Creating a link is much more in line than it used to be. It's much less visually different. And so just the ability to quickly do things. And I really noticed that latency myself. I don't know about all of you. It kind of depends on your use case, I think, what would benefit you most. But yeah, that, and it's not just for linking, it's also for images. The image editing experience, I think, is much nicer than it was before. The media embedding one is similar to before. That's the one place where we're still using Drupal dialogues, because the media library dialog is super complex, super advanced. Rewriting that entirely in JavaScript would have been a wasteful undertaking because it's been so refined in Drupal itself. But yeah, basically the smoothness of interacting, which gets us, thanks to CKEditor 5, to a Google Docs-esque experience, in my opinion. Especially now that we have I think it was in Drupal 10.1 that we shipped it, and some people were a little bit like on the fence whether it would be noticed in a negative way by anybody, but so far it's still nobody. I'm curious if you even noticed. But in Drupal 10.1, we changed something that is now enabled by default, and that is that you can do markdown style writing. So you can do asterisk something, asterisk, and then it's going to be bolded. Yes, exactly. So it's a major productivity boost for those of us that know it. We did some user testing effectively, like on a small scale, to verify that people that wanted to type really weird content, like star something star, and like that's literally what they wanted, that they could have it not be bolded, but actually have that be the content. And it worked fine. And so far, nobody has complained. So yeah, that alone, like the smoother experience in doing linking and images, but then also the ability to basic markup really efficiently, like those two things together make CKEditor 5 much nicer to interact with than 4 for me.
I know what I'm doing after this call, is testing that feature out.
I just did. I opened up my blog and started creating a page. And sure enough, if you hit star something star, it goes italics.
One of my favorite features in Slack is when you highlight text and then just paste the URL that's on your clipboard, it automatically makes the text you selected a link. Does CKEditor 5 have that?
Okay, so did you ask selecting text that you just wrote and then pasting a link?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Over the selected text. It's like instead of doing like a command K and then pasting the URL and then hitting OK, you literally in Slack you can select the text and paste, and it turns it into a URL, like into a hyperlink.
I don't know if CKEditor 5 does this. I personally hate the Slack rich text editor. It always like it breaks often, it crashes often. So I didn't realize there was something nice, but hey, I'm glad to hear that.
John, you have your blog.
Are all of you trying that?
You test it?
Wait,
I use it all the time.
What do you need me to test? Sorry.
Type some text into the CKEditor, then copy a URL and paste it over some text, and tell us if it pastes the URL or if it makes it into a link.
It makes it into a link. I just tried it. So
it does.
So CKEditor 5 supports that. Holy crap! Isn't that awesome? I love that feature.
Great question, Ivan. We all learned something new about CKEditor 5.
Yeah, between Markdown and being able to just highlight text and copy links, like, oh boy.
You're going to be creating so much content, it sounds like, John.
I mean, listen, I'm going to go from 0 to at least maybe a page a month now. Who knows? So Stephen Cross and I last year had a bet to do more blogging last year, and I failed miserably. But I don't know, with these features, it might make it a lot easier for me to keep that up this year.
Let's hope they're not listening to this podcast, then.
He will be.
Oh yeah, he'll hear me. He'll hear the fact. Well, I mean, he did a great job. He actually blogged a whole bunch, and not so much from my end. So let's talk about roadmap items, right? So like, obviously CKEditor 5 has its own set of roadmap items, and like, we kind of like are benefited by them working on their roadmap items. But I'm wondering specifically with regards to Drupal core, like what's on the CK5 editor roadmap that like you're excited about, like we're going to integrate with, that sort of thing.
Yep. So first of all, a roadmap is a very strong word. Drupal is a like duocracy, if you will. I forget what the right words are, but essentially, if somebody wants to do something, I'm a maintainer for the CKEditor 5 submodule, or sorry, the component subsystem. That's what I was looking for. So I'm happy to review things, and I'm eager to mentor people that get stuck on particular bits and pieces. So John, if you're interested in something particular happening in Drupal core, I'd be more than happy to review and help you get through the process. But in terms of concrete things that I know are happening, like the number one thing that I'm excited about is something I've been wanting Drupal to do for more than a decade now, and that is make it easy to actually link to content in Drupal. Like you would expect a CMS to do that, but finding content to link to, right now you would have to navigate and like use Drupal's search or whatever to find the URL, copy paste the URL, and then like go to your content that you're actually creating and then paste it there, like manually into the like HTTPS, hopefully, / like that thing. Like that's not something that everybody should have to know. Like some people are a little bit intimidated by URLs still to this day. So I think linking to something in Drupal should be trivial and delightful. And so yes, link it is the thing I kind of want to bring into Drupal core, and that's what this is about. So I created an issue called Drastically Improving the Linking Experience in CKEditor 5. It's issue 3317769. There's a lot of people following it, a lot of people excited about it. I pushed it as far as I can. Currently, Ben Mullins, my colleague, who's also co-maintainer of the CKEditor 5 module in Drupal core and also an accessibility expert and a JavaScript expert, is dealing with the JavaScript pieces that I'm less strong in. And he's like pushing it like across that final stretch to get it core worthy. And like look at the demo, try the issue MR, try the patch, and I think you will like what you see. And I really believe that this will make the authoring experience that much better in Drupal core. That's my only big thing.
I like what I'm hearing, because that is one thing that I think Linkit does a good job of providing some of that functionality, but like, why do I have to install another module? Why can't it just be in core natively? And like, then you kind of get into that, like, oh, there are some issues with Linkit in certain field types and certain areas. Like it would just be better if it was there all the time. So
I know that this would be almost impossible to find out, but when I see issues like this, where, I mean, that is one well-written issue summary. I mean, there's GIFs, it is wonderful. There's a ton of collaboration.
GIFs. He means GIFs. He means GIFs. Just like it's nice editor, not Nick editor. Yeah, we're mispronouncing everything in this episode.
I mean, one of the things that I'd love to see is like how much effort went into this. I mean, you can see just at a glance like the number of comments, the amount of effort put there, but like how many man hours have been put into improving Drupal just for this one issue, which would be a significant improvement, but I mean, it's got to be hundreds at this point. That's a massive issue.
Yeah, like I first started this on my own time because I really believed that it was very important, and I was able to get I think it was 5% of my time in one quarter, then maybe 10% another quarter, and then another 5, I think. So I get some time to work on this.
Wait. Sorry, keep going. I just saw something.
Go ahead.
No.
Okay.
You go, and then I'm going to interrupt. Okay. I just saw something and got excited, but you can finish your thought.
But it's very interesting. Like I thought that I was going to be able to really extract the MVP parts, like the minimal essential parts of Linkit that I believe were necessary for this feature to be solid and good. But then people chimed in and mentioned, well, I absolutely need to be able to customize this one thing, or I absolutely need to be able to make this guarantee this is consistent across text formats or between text format and another type of fields, link field, for example. And so requirements kept being added along the way because people had valid use cases that if it is in Drupal core, some of the things, like it's sometimes a trade-off whether some capability belongs in Drupal core or in Contrib. Yeah. But like sometimes it's easier to move the conversation forward and get to consensus if you actually build the things rather than say and deflect and say like that belongs in Contrib. So that's kind of what happened here as well. I added capability after capability to comply with all the different needs. Many of them are very valid. I think that some of them are like a small percentage of sites, but that's my point of view. And I'm actually not building Drupal sites day to day or at all, really. So I defer to others to say what is actually really necessary. So yeah, there's a lot of things that made it balloon because of that.
I'm going to say that one thing I'm seeing here that is absolutely 100% necessary, and I can think of a use case for it right off the bat, is the ability to create your own link suggester, right? So being able to say like, my use case in my head right now is like a client uses their own, DAM solution, right? And you want to easily integrate that into being able to link from documents, from content, right? Like you can build your own link suggester to go out and, query an API and get those links in there. And like, it's built right into the WYSIWYG editor. So like, I think that is very, very exciting. And, as Nick said, this issue is so well written with pictures, which is great for me because, listeners know that I'm not much of a reader. Like, yeah. So this, I'm going to ask a follow-up question with my excitement. I'm going to ask, tack on a question. So this says it's tagged to like Drupal 11, right? Like, is there a...
Everything's tagged to Drupal 11 at this point.
Okay, fine.
Until it's going to be tagged to Drupal main.
Yeah, we don't have the main branch just yet, indeed. And the reason that it's all Drupal 11 is because now that we have GitLab, MRs are tied to a certain target branch. And 10.3 doesn't exist yet because we want to keep 10.3 and 11 the same for as long as we can. And otherwise, if everything was going into 10.3 already, then every single MR that existed against Drupal core would need to change from 10.3 as a target to 11 as a target. And due to limitations in GitLab, that actually means that only a core committer can actually change that around. So it's more because of limitations in the infrastructure that we have, that it's targeted for Drupal 11. But anything that lands in Drupal 11 today, actually, that just means it's landing in Drupal 10.3. It's just 10.3 is going to be branched off of the 11x branch.
So I guess my question is, should I get excited that this is going to be part of Drupal 11, or should I like cool my jets because there's a ton more work that needs to be done here?
It could be in 10.3, assuming everything.
It could be in
done.
10.3.
Oh boy!
I'm hoping. I'm trying.
Me
but like,
too.
6 months.
Hey,
from
you know
now,
what you can do to make it happen? Review it. That would be really helpful.
Well, I know something I'm putting on my to-do list later this afternoon.
Thanks for going through all of these ideas for the roadmap and how you see this moving forward and your experience. I want to ask sort of a bigger question about CKEditor and whether there's something larger in the future after CKEditor 5. CKEditor 6, if there are going to be any big changes there, like any ideas on that?
So I thought the answer was absolutely not in the near future because CKEditor 5 is still getting major releases, so they're still refining it, and it's only a major release because there is a BC break, and oftentimes it's a BC break that doesn't affect the vast majority of people, but any BC break triggers a new major release. And so it's not like there is any end in sight to that. They're still evolving the code base. They're still evolving it to do more advanced things as well. So I think the short answer is unlikely. But I also passed on the question to the CKEditor team, and their response was no, as in N and then many O's with a big grin, because, and then they mentioned CKEditor 6 is banned in our internal talks as well. We still have a lot on our plate when it comes to the current version, and that is our focus. End quote. Yeah. So no, it's not happening anytime soon. CKEditor 5 is much more future ready than CKEditor 4 was, because they built it from the ground up. For example, they're not using the browser's DOM parsing, which guarantees that things are consistent across everything, but it also is why some tags don't work correctly, or they need to do special things to support certain complex markup. So it comes with up and downsides, but yeah, another big upgrade like this, not anytime soon.
Sounds good. And it sounds like they've broken out their dependency on the version from the actual version of the software. Because if you look at GitHub, they're currently on version 41, but that's still CKEditor 5. So I think they ideologically changed it because they're like, we're building this from the ground up. It's a new thing. People need to be aware of that. But unless they need a completely new groundbreaking implementation from the ground up, they're probably not going to switch to 6 because they can just keep going on version 42 or 43.
Yeah. And as an example of like big changes being able to happen in the CKEditor 5 cycle, last year they transitioned from JavaScript to TypeScript everywhere, like,
Oh, wow.
and the entire code base, which was a massive undertaking, I hear. Like, it didn't really help us in any significant way. They can iterate faster now. But, like, they completely changed their entire code base, and it's
Wow.
still CKEditor 5. So
Yep, makes sense.
Wow.
So I'm going to take you up on your offer that you made earlier, maybe. I have an issue, and I'll dig this up for the show notes, but I have an issue that I created in Drupal a while back. Something that I've been a big fan of over the last year and a half has been native web components. And I attempted to allow list a native web component that I created in CKEditor. And it turns out, and I'm aware that this has a lot of implications, especially around security, compatibility, rendering, all that kind of stuff. But Drupal's core cross-site scripting filter strips out anything that's not valid HTML, including custom components. I'm curious if there's been, and I asked the CKEditor team this question too, and they said it would take a custom plugin, but I'm curious from the Drupal side, do you foresee any movement in allowing custom HTML elements to be put into a WYSIWYG at some point and configured, or is that always going to contain custom code?
That's a really good question. In principle, it can be done today without any custom code, except that it will not be rendered nicely. So if you enable the source editing view and add your custom tag to the list of allowed tags, that's going to register that tag, and that should work. It's just not going to render inside the CKEditor instance. And you're nodding no, so you're saying it gets stripped?
Not work. Yeah, especially even in the views interface. No matter how you allow list it gets put through the core admin cross-site scripting filter, and that rips. So you can allow list any valid normal HTML elements, but you can't allow list a custom element because the admin cross-site scripting is hard-coded to only approve HTML elements. And I spent a good couple of hours trying to override the admin cross-site filter and did not make a lot of progress there. So yeah, this is very niche, but a lot of my clients are moving to native web components for everything. So they build, even if it doesn't render nicely on the back end, having the ability to include them would be a huge benefit, and it would clean up views so much to be able to rewrite and use those. So this has become one of my. It's been a while since I've looked at it, but it's become one of my pet projects. So I'm interested in what you think about that.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. I want to understand a little bit more before I have some thoughts, but I want to understand this problem better first. Is it the filter HTML filter that's getting in the way, or is it literally the XSS thing that you cannot ever disable in the admin UI only? Meaning, if you did this, the experiment that you did, if you did it in the full HTML text format, does it work then? Did you try that?
It rips it out.
It even in full HTML, because we don't do any filtering.
So I can add, so let's say I have and we don't have to go too far down this road because we got a couple questions left and we're running up against it. But let's say I make a custom component called, wonderful divider, wonderful dash divider. I add that to the full HTML filter. I put that in full HTML. Oh, you know what? Maybe it was CKEditor 4. Maybe CKEditor 5 handles it. So I will test that and report back. But it didn't even make it plain text. It just removes it. When you save it and can edit, it's gone.
I feel like you should call it nice divider.
Nice divider.
I think that, like, in principle, full HTML doesn't do any stripping. So it should not be possible that it removes anything. But it's different maybe in the admin UI and specifically the views admin UI, because maybe there's some extra filtering happening there. That is possible.
Absolutely in views. I'm not sure. I'll double check the full HTML one, but and because I don't think I tested that in CKEditor 5, so maybe something changed.
Okay, try that. There is another module that I find personally rather intriguing, and it's pretty new. It's called the extended HTML filter. I'll catch you the link later. It's drupal.org/project/extended_HTML_filter. And it kind of extends the filter HTML filter that is part of Drupal core, and it extends it, hence the name. And the only thing it changes is that it allows you to specifically support the style attributes, which Drupal core by default does not allow you, because there's big security consequences tied to it. And this allows you to say, no, I do trust the user to use these styles only. So for example, I don't know, let's say width and height. So you can change the width and height of things, but you're maybe not allowed to do opacity to trick people into clicking on things that would lead elsewhere, that kind of thing.
Interesting.
And so this, in principle, would allow you to use a restricted text format while allowing that. But that is only talking about style. But you could do a similar thing to explicitly allow custom HTML tags as well. So yeah, there's potential there, I think, to expand on what that module is doing.
I'll look into that. Attributes might have been one of the other issues too, but anyway, I'll take a look at that. I'll find that issue. Anyway, thanks. I appreciate your.
And there's one other thing tied to that, like web components, like rendering them is one thing, but being able to edit them in a sensible way is a different thing. Because a lot of the time, what CKEditor needs to do is have a different representation for the editing view versus the preview view. I forget the exact correct terminology, but basically, if you're editing, say, an image caption, you need different markup than just the rendered image caption, because you need to be able to type into it. And so even if it was a web component that in principle works everywhere, as you're editing the contents of the web component, then you probably need a different kind of markup anyway. So literally reusing is probably not feasible anyway.
It also gets really complicated, because if you're editing an attribute, the attribute only, like a component only reads that on initial render. So you'd have something that there's a lot of complex issues there. I'm aware it's not a trivial thing to just turn on, but even if you just have the ability to put them in the source, that'd be great. But yeah, we can move on.
Makes sense.
So before we close out the show, we talked earlier when we were talking about additional or alternative editors, right? We kind of mentioned Gutenberg, and it didn't exist when we were kind of like looking at CKEditor 5, and I say we as like the Drupal community, right? I'm wondering, does the work that's happening with CKEditor and Drupal core right now play a role in kind of what's happening around the addition of the Gutenberg editor into Drupal, or vice versa? Like, is there some sort of symbiotic relationship there, or is it going to be one of like, you can use CKEditor that's in core, or you can add the Gutenberg editor module and just do your own thing?
It's kind of the latter. It's not like there's any participation or contribution or suggestion from people working on the Gutenberg editor into the CKEditor issue queue in Drupal core. But it's also not the opposite way. So we could reach out in theory, but already it's a challenge to have every single use case that anybody ever used with CKEditor 4. And certain like obscure details are like crucial for one person. Like getting all of that fixed is a massive undertaking, and it's blocking some people still. For some use cases, they need to change a little bit in the way they work in order for them to adopt CKEditor 5 sometimes. So like, I think it's better for us to focus on that. And like, there is already limited time. All of us need to shift to other things, as I'm sure you understand. So yeah, there's not anything actively happening there. I'm interested to see what Gutenberg will do. I saw that they have about 4,000 sites using it, like according to the very imperfect and incomplete Drupal.org usage statistics, because it's only reporting sites that actually have the update module enabled. So it's growing. I'm curious to see how it all plays out. But yeah, it is relatively obscure, I think, still to this day. If you look at another kind of obscure module that relates to Drupal core, I thought of the REST UI module, the UI to configure the REST module, that has a growth of about 10,000 sites a year. And Gutenberg is 10 times less than that. So it's about 1,000 sites a year. So I'm curious to see how it plays out. It's a big undertaking for sure to integrate it nicely. And like, I wish them the best, and I'm open to any conversation. But I don't think Drupal core is currently pursuing anything in that direction. Maybe it'll change. That's fine. Not married to anything.
Well, thank you for joining us, Wim. It's been a huge pleasure having you on the show to talk about this.
Likewise.
Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/tdpromo.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choose to become a patron. All right, Wim, if our listeners want to get in touch with you or had some questions or wanted to contribute, what's the best way for them to do that?
If it's related to CKEditor 5, probably the CKEditor 5 Slack channel in the Drupal Slack. And otherwise, you can find me on Mastodon, the Drupal.community Mastodon /@WimLeers, or my website, wimleers.com.
Awesome. And Ivan, how about you?
You can find me on my profile page on 107.com. So 107, TEN7, the number 7.com/Ivan, IVAN.
And John, how about you?
You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi, and you can find out more about EPAM at EPAM.com.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixman, NICXVAN.
If you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.